everyone. Welcome to The Download, where we bring you discussion and analysis from a Catholic perspective. Today is Wednesday. It is Wednesday, my dudes, May 31st, 2023. I'm Simon Rafe, here with my two co-hosts, Kyle Copey and Christine Niles. I will leave it to you to work out which one is which. And joining us today as a guest host is Nick Wiley. Hey, Nick, how you doing?
Hey, Simon, doing well.
Good, good. Marriage and the family. These are the very building blocks of a functioning society, but they've been under attack for decades now, as the sexual revolution has brought destruction on countless families and relationships. Now, we'll be getting into some discussions about family life later in the show, but first, we're talking with a special guest, author Layla Miller, about why Catholics should not attend invalid marriages. Hello, Layla. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you doing today?
I'm doing very, very well. It's like I said, it's Wednesday. It's a great day. It's a lovely day. I love Wednesdays. Anyway, I believe that you wrote a piece about this for Crisis Magazine not that long ago. Can you summarize your points for our viewers who maybe didn't read it?
Sure. And I'm just going to preface this by saying what I said in this article would not be controversial in any other era of the church. This is not something that anyone would have argued about or wondered about. It just was kind of known that you don't participate in something that is a grave sin. So lately, in the last few decades, we've had this sort of reflexive idea that, well, we can go to the invalid marriages of baptized Catholics. I want to be very specific. I'm talking about baptized Catholics who, under canon law, are required to be married in the church as with the witness of the church, unless they get a dispensation from the bishop. And for the past few decades, we've been told, well, yes, that's true. However, if you discern or if you pray about it, you could go. And so I kind of, after a while, I was thinking, well, okay, what moral principle is that hanging on? You know, where did that come from all of a sudden? Because that's something new. And then I realized, well, all that advice is attached to nothing, to no moral principle, no Catholic understanding. So I kind of just went through the 9 reasons that people give for why you could be able to go to these gravely sinful fake weddings. And I went through and just kind of debunked those and said, this is really not attached to anything that we know.
Yeah, because I read the article and I thought that it was really very, very good. It was very comprehensive. It covered everything that needed to be covered there. And, obviously, as you said, this is not a controversial position in any other era of the church. To me, it wasn't a controversial position. Initially, I kind of read this thing and I'm like, okay, this is great and it's very comprehensive, but it's kind of like, explaining why water is wet. It's like, this is a thing that I know. This is a thing that obviously in my circles that I move in, it's just a known thing. And then it's like, oh, wait a minute. No, this is a wider issue out there. Because I did I have a show here on Church Milton called Hardline, and I did one about attending invalid marriages. This particular problem of, as you say, it's baptized Catholics who need to be married in the church, or they're not allowed to be married a second time after divorce, and that sort of stuff. And it essentially coming to basically the same conclusion as you, that it's just not a good idea, and that any justification to do so it's really kind of special pleading and spurious.
It is, and we always forget that our first obligation as Catholics is to not offend God. And so what is an offense to God is a sin, or to participate in a sin, especially a grave sin, which we know that a simulation of a sacrament or a pretend wedding, which is really amounts to fornication if they weren't married before, or adultery if they were married before without annulment. Those are grave sins. So to participate in that, get your nails done, get your hair done, buy a dress. I don't really like this idea that I'm going to this wedding, but I'm going to really party. I'm going to feast, and I'm going to take pictures and smile and clap and toast. And that's participation in a sin. And I don't know how we get around that because, well, again, I guess we haven't been taught that there are 9 ways to be an accessory to another's sin. And some of those are like by flattery or by participation. And so I don't know how anyone could argue that you're not participating as a guest in a wedding if you're celebrating. So it's very scandalous. But so number one, we don't want to offend God. And also, our first obligation isn't to please our children who are getting married outside the church, or please our friends or loved ones who are getting married outside the church. Our first obligation, spiritually speaking, is our own souls. So we are culpable. There's always that argument, well, they don't know, they don't know any better. Well, number one is like, well, why don't they know, especially if it's your child? And then if they don't know, tell them, because that's something we need to do, right? You instruct the ignorant, or admonish the sinner. And then, but if they still say, well, I don't care, or I don't believe it. Well, we know, right? Yeah. I know. So I'm culpable, even if for whatever reason they are not culpable for doing this invalid, immoral wedding. I'm culpable for participating, and for pretending that it is somehow a wedding.
Yeah, and of course you are causing scandal by doing so.
Hey, Layla, I just wanted to ask about, so your my favorite one that you gave of the arguments is the one that I hear the most, is like this principle of double effect, trying to make this into that, which is, I don't know, it's applied in other places very well. I don't see how it possibly fits here, but it is the one that I think that I hear the most. And it was my favorite response that you gave to that argument. So can you lay down sort of that argument and your response to it?
Sure. So for the principle of double effect, the actual act that is being done has to in itself be either good or at least morally neutral. So in other words, Christianity 101 says we can never commit sin, any sin, in order to bring about a good. That's like basic stuff we should be teaching the first graders, at the parish. We don't know that anymore. Nobody teaches that anymore. So for the principle of double effect, that has to be in play. And so what we're saying here is that, we're going to use the principle of double effect, which requires that you not be sinning in this act. Well, but you actually are, but we're going to pretend you're not. But then you can go. But it's like, well, you just violated the principle, because number one, the act can't be wrong. It has to be either neutral or a good. And the only way that actually being at these immoral weddings could be neutral or good is if your witness is to dissent, that you might be praying quietly in the back, just looking really depressed, but you're not actually acting like a guest. Okay, you could physically be present and do that because you're kind of protesting. Sackcloth and ashes would be great, because then it's really obvious that you're not there to celebrate or to participate in this sin, but you're there, in a good way, to be a counterbalance to what's going on with this sin. So again, I guess you could argue that you could do this with the principle of double effect, but it has to be that you're protesting or that you're dissenting in some way, not that you're participating and celebrating. It's a completely different thing. Obviously, we all know this in our hearts.
Please, next time somebody has this that comes up in mind with an invalid marriage that you're invited to, please show up in sackcloth and ashes and send us the video. I would love to see someone actually do that. But Christine, you had a question?
Yeah, Layla, first I want to thank you very much for the article that you wrote in Crisis. It's excellent, lays everything out very clearly as to why we can't be attending these invalid marriages. And something I've been saying for a long time is that parents' primary duty is salvation of their children's souls. And they will be held responsible. They have to, they have to give an account before God one day when they stand before God. Did I help save my children's souls? What did I do? Doesn't matter if the children were successful in their career, or popular, or made all sorts of money. If their souls are not saved, as far as I'm concerned, the parents have basically failed. So I think your article is very good in laying out that supernatural perspective has to be first, and the understanding that what's really going on here is it's a gravely sinful union. It's fornicating couples, and you can't support that in any way. I was glad that you quoted Father Chad Ripperger, the exorcist. I just wanted to read a short excerpt from that, and then you could kind of comment. But I thought he was very to the point. He said there's a lack of shame when the child will insist on getting married outside the church and expect the parents to come to the wedding. And when the parents do the honorable thing and refuse, the children will then try to shame, imagine that, the parents by telling them that they are being divisive and uncharitable. It is the children who are being divisive and uncharitable.
Right. So charity and sin are opposed. And so we're being told by a lot of otherwise faithful and good priests, this is why it's so sad to me, that if, I've heard of people who are told if you don't go to your children's wedding, you will be the one who is being divisive. You are the one who's being uncharitable. And think of that as kind of gaslighting in a way, where it's basically saying, you're the crazy, you're the bad one. You are trying to do the right thing, trying to set a witness, not only for this couple, but for the children perhaps that you have that are watching you. And you are being told that you're the one doing the bad thing. That's heartbreaking. People are already heartbroken not to be able to go or support people that they love, but they're doing the right thing. It's called carrying a cross. It's called, being taking social shame upon ourselves to do the right thing. And then to have priests and other good Catholics tell you that you're at fault is just, again, it's just another wound that you have to carry. But
absolutely. Well, yeah. Thank you again for a great article.
And Layla, I just wanted to ask about, I just wanted to maybe clarify for people out there that, the decision, let's say, of a parent not to attend an invalid wedding that their child may be having, that decision it's got to be a tough one, a gut-wrenching one, to sort of do the right thing, knowing that it could have these consequences of disruption with the familial relationship. But I think you say something very to the point on this. You say, nothing's changed. That prohibition was always there. It's always going to be there. And, for generations past, the people who wanted to get married outside the church and apostatize or whatever, they were considered the weird ones and ostracized. But now it's the faithful Catholics who are the ones who are ostracized just for sort of standing up for their beliefs. And you say something to the effect of, well, what's changed? Well, it's just our unwillingness as modern man to suffer for the fidelity of Christ. It's really an individual conscience matter of that, we're not standing up for what we believe in, and because we're afraid of the potential effects that may or may not happen.
Right, because there is a price to be paid now for doing something that makes you look mean. That's the worst thing that can happen, is that you are, quote unquote, mean. And really, these parents are the ones who are brave enough to not go to these weddings, who do kind of buck even the prevailing feeling in the church, which is really sad. They aren't looking to cut off their children. In fact, that's not even part of the deal. They just politely decline to go to one day's events because of their deeply held Catholic belief that they cannot participate in something that is objectively offensive to God. And so they don't want to cut off the relationship. And in fact, usually the ones cutting off the relationship are the couple. Are people who say, well, you won't come to my wedding. Because again, the avenging conscience, if you ever read about the avenging conscience, people who are in sin need other people to affirm them. They want that kind of community support. That's what we see in all the whole LGBT stuff, where it's everybody has to agree with you and they have to celebrate. And so if someone just demurs, I can't go to this one thing, I'm so sorry. They're not cutting the person off, but the couple will often end up cutting the parents off and saying, well, if you won't come to my wedding, that means you don't love me. And then they do this emotional manipulation. It's really emotional blackmail. So we really have to just see it more clearly and see it with the eyes of objective truth and what's really happening here, and who is really the one who is loving versus the one who is manipulating or punishing.
Yeah, Layla, in addition to writing these great articles in Crisis and really kind of putting the cat among the pigeons, you've also done a lot of work with kind of the adult children of divorce, which I think is a wonderful ministry that's really needed these days because of the sheer number of people who are divorced. And now, of course, there are these children who've grown up and are adults and are dealing with these emotional scars that happened when they were children. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. It's just another thing that this was never on my radar screen. I'm not divorced, and my parents weren't divorced. And so I started to recognize that all around me, though, there were these complicated factors in many people's lives that I never knew anything about. So I started asking questions, and then I ended up asking a bunch of people. It ended up being 70 people in my book, Primal Loss. How did your parents' divorce affect you? and now that they're adults, how does this affect your life? And I was so blown away by the responses. I could not believe that I did not know there really are two worlds: the world of people who came from these broken families, and then just people who go along not even thinking about the complications and the burdens thereof. So I just kind of gave them a voice, because it's not my wound, so it was easier for me to put that out there and take the slings and arrows, because people do not want to hear that children are harmed by divorce long term.
No.
They don't want to hear that.
No, they don't. I mean, obviously, because there are, so many divorces happening now, and of course, there is always obviously this very real impact. I mean, I think we all know people who are children of divorce, and they're adults. They're our age now. You and I think, are probably roughly the same age. We're both Gen X, and there was a lot of parents within our cohort. I knew many people growing up, and their parents were divorced or they were remarried, and there was step families and so forth. And when you look back on it, it's like, yes, there was an injury there, and now you see the adults there are, and they are playing out in many cases. They're kind of making their parents' mistakes again. What can some of these adults do? And people who have suffered under divorce, they've been kind of divorced against, as they say. And somebody doesn't want to get divorced, but their spouse says, well, no, I do, and there's the no-fault divorce or what have you, and things. What are some things that people can do? What are resources they can lean on?
Well, yes, and first I would like to say, yes, the abandoned spouse, that's another hidden group that maybe this is a whole other show, but that standers, people who stand for their vows, even after someone has abandoned them or divorced them or left them, that's a whole other group in the church that is marginalized, not talked about, because what are we supposed to do? Just go get your annulment and move on, right? Yeah. So the people who stay faithful till death, like they vowed, just like Christ did with us, they're laughed at in the church anymore. They're patted on the head, and that's a whole other subject that's just blew my mind when I realized that this was going on in the church as well. But the resources for adult children of divorce, and there are two really good resources, are lifegivingwounds.org, and then for the teens and young adults, restoredministry.com. Most programs for kids of divorce tend to be not good. A lot of them do gaslight the children. It's kind of like, the divorce journey of your parents, oh gosh, love isn't gone, it's just changed, and now you have more people to love. It's kind of like gaslighting these kids who already have come from this shattered foundation. They know that this is not right, but they're told there's something wrong with them for not getting with the program, because all the adults think it's fine. And so those two organizations, they don't gaslight the children. They don't downplay the injustice. People have a natural right to a married mom and dad. God gave us that natural right, and they know that. So these organizations help those kids really understand, and then be able to just embrace the cross that they've been given and come through and be redeemed through it.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for all of that information. What I'll do is obviously we'll have the producer here grab all of the links that you've mentioned, a link to your article and so forth and everything else, and we'll get those put in the description of the video so obviously people can, click on those nice and easily. I think there is another show here. We would love to have you back on. I think that would be absolutely tremendous. We'd love to have you back on to discuss issues such as, the abandoned spouse within the church and the children of divorce and all these things. I think these are very, very important things. Layla Miller, author of a great article, worker on some wonderful projects and wonderful ministries. Thank you so much for joining us here on The Download today.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Yeah, I like her. She can come back. Yeah, that's good. No, I mean, wow, she does a ton of stuff, doesn't she, and the whole thing. But I think these are like really, important issues to be discussing about, the family and divorce. So
yeah, there's one that. A question to pose that I don't know the answer to, that I think is tough, and that from that discussion, I think it begs the question of, okay, the invalid marriage happens, now where do we go from here? Okay, I skipped my kid's wedding, or my friend, whatever. Where do I go with the relationship now? Because now they're in this fornicacious relationship. They are leading their soul to hell. If they are a baptized Catholic, they are not in a marriage. They're just fornicating and cohabiting, and now they're on the road to hell. So what do you think is the best kind of advice as to proceed? Because we shouldn't completely cut these people out of our lives, but how do we proceed while still showing that, yes, like, the descent of you need to convert your ways and make this marriage right or whatever, but also not becoming too familial again to where it's just like, oh, okay, they didn't come to the wedding, but they basically accept me now.
Yeah, you're asking the wrong person. I'm on the record as saying only blood is only redder than water. But let me have people who actually have hearts answer it.
Well, I mean, there needs to be preparation going into it, too. If you're the parent who has a child who is planning to get married outside of the church as a baptized Catholic, I mean, there needs to be that sort of pre-evangelization, right? You need to be having conversations with them. You have to at least let them know that, hey, look, if you want to do this, you as a baptized Catholic are still under the jurisdiction of the church. They may have apostatized. They may say, look, I don't go to church. I don't consider myself Catholic anymore. It doesn't matter. If they're a baptized Catholic, they're bound juridically, canonically to get married within the church. And if not, there is, sort of a way they can get around that, but they have to have a dispensation from the bishop. I don't know how easily these things are obtainable. Maybe
a dispensation from the bishop? Yeah, those are real hard to get.
Exactly. It's like an email you send. Yeah. Maybe you text your bishop and he's like, yeah, go ahead. It's kind of like the annulment situation now that we have. But yeah, I mean, there needs to be that pre-evangelization, but in terms, and then don't go to the wedding, but also the post-evangelization too. And Layla talks about this in her article. She's like, just because you dissent and you don't go to the ceremony does not necessarily mean you're disowning the couple. No, you're still having them as a part of your life. You're not going to approve or consent to or be a part of in any way anything sinful that they're a part of. But yeah, you can have them over for Sunday barbecue or whatever. It's that type of stuff is fine. You're not disowning them, but in their minds, in the couple's minds, you are disowning them because you didn't show up to their fake wedding. Mm-hmm.
This is something I've studied intensely because I myself was in a sacramentally invalid marriage for 11 years. I fell away from the Catholic faith because I was raised not knowing anything about it. I've said before, I didn't know the difference between a Carmelite and a Caramel. I knew nothing about the faith. I left, joined the Protestant church, and but was still bound by the dictates of the Catholic faith. And this is not something I was aware of or knew. I met a Protestant. We got married in a Protestant ceremony. And it wasn't until I came back to the faith years later that I realized, oh, this marriage is actually invalid. I had no idea. And so I contacted the Metropolitan Tribunal to talk to the canon lawyers there to find out what was going on. And a lot of Catholics don't understand this. A lot of Catholics are very ignorant. I was completely ignorant. I had no idea that I was bound by Catholic law on marriage. But I was, even as someone who had left the faith. Here's the thing, though. I didn't formally defect. You have to formally defect as a Catholic in order to be released by the canonical requirements. And formal defection is actually a thing you have to actually call up the parish where you're baptized or the bishop and say, I am formally leaving the church. They have to actually write it down in the register right next to your baptismal register that she's no longer Catholic, and then you're no longer bound. You can't just sort of fall away and then get married somewhere else. And that's what I did. And so obviously, we had to go through this whole process. And the choice is either convalidate, which means the priest comes in and actually blesses your marriage, then it makes it valid. Or if that's not possible, then you divorce and you separate. In that case, you've never been married in the eyes of the church. So in the eyes of the church, I've never actually been married.
Yeah, because people often use the phrase annulment, which is, and I always try very carefully not to use the phrase annulment. Sometimes obviously will slip out, but it is declaration of nullity. What you are declaring a reality that existed. You are not making a reality. An annulment, the idea is that there is an annulling.
It's like a past tense.
It's there. But it's I am declaring that this thing is null and has always been null, and it never was a thing there with that. I think, though, to your point of what do you do with these people, it's an interesting one because obviously we all have friends who are kind of in these similar situations and related situations. One situation that I was in, a friend of the family was getting married, and he was getting married in a Catholic church to a non-Catholic woman, and they got married there in the Catholic church, and then afterwards at the reception they had this weird mushroom ceremony. I jest ye not. They had a ring of mushrooms which had been planted on skewers, large mushrooms like yay big, which had been planted in a circle, and then they did this weird mushroom ceremony that kind of appealed to her sensibilities. I was spitting blood, but I did bury a small. I had on me a tiny third-class relic, I think, of Padre Pio. It was a tiny little piece of cloth that had been touched to Padre Pio, and I buried it in the center of the mushrooms, and I'm like, I'll get you, mate. But anyway, so they had this thing, and I was like, well, this doesn't bode well, does it? Anyway, so they became divorced shortly afterwards, and then they were pursuing, or he was pursuing, a decree of nullity. But Christmas came around a few years later, and they were to their family that was to come to our house for Christmas dinner. It was, well, he'll be turning up with his girlfriend. And my wife and I were like, I assure you that he will not. He is not. He is still married. In the fact that the decree of nullity may very well come down, but officially still married in the eyes of the church. And it's like, he is not turning up with his girlfriend. It is not appropriate for him as a married man to turn up with somebody else, in that sense. And that was difficult. There was a schism between the two families there. There was a whole thing, and it was like difficult for my wife and I with that sort of thing. So that I think in many ways is the kind of thing you have to stand on principle, and it's like, look, this is the reality.
And we should clarify too for people who may not know that there are different types of decrees of nullity. The one that I went through was very open and shut. It was lack of canonical form. It's the most black and white. It takes literally 5 minutes. All you have to show is that you were baptized a Catholic, and then the wedding certificate from the Protestant service or whatever, Justice of the Peace, and that's it. They sign your decree of nullity, they stamp it, and it's done. But then you have the other ones which involve psychological defects. And that takes a much longer time. That's where you have to submit all sorts of evidence. You have to get witnesses. That can take months and months and months. But that has to do with, for instance, many different factors. You could go into a marriage under a lie. The person might be lying to you in a very serious way, so you're not really freely consenting. Or let's say you go in with reservations like, I will never have children in this marriage, I will use contraception always, all that kind of thing. All sorts of psychological factors can go into granting decrees of nullity. Having said that, sometimes I think dioceses, in a mistaken charity or compassion, are too quick to be handing out all these decrees of nullity. So
yeah, if you do the comparison on it statistically, compared to let's call it post-council, pre-council, for lack of a better era, it's less decrees of nullity. I'm going to use your word. Were granted. Pre-Vatican II, and now in the modern church, more are. But I sort of have a different take on this. I think that actually might be a good thing, because I think that a lot of marriages nowadays are truly invalid. People just don't know what they're getting into. So it might actually be a good, it's bad that it's happening. People are going into it with the wrong intentions and all this stuff. But, it's one of those things that God is allowing.
Yeah, it's so the whole issue of the decree of nullity and the declarations thereof, this is a thing that periodically we get asked, hey, you need to do church militancy, you need to do a show, you need to do a thing on the scandal of annulments, and they put out the stats, and it's like so many are granted now, and prior to this date, so many are granted, and obviously there's a huge increase. And the problem is, and I have discussed this with canon lawyers, I've discussed this with, not just like generic canon lawyers, like specific canon lawyers who sit on tribunals. There is a very good friend of mine who I will not say anything more about him because you'll be able to find out who he is, but he serves on the tribunal as a canon lawyer, and he and I discussed this over breakfast once, he is saying, yes, there's this issue of that, but how do you actually discuss it? How do you discuss the issue? How do you present the issue without getting into the individual cases? You would need to actually kind of say, okay, you've got the single statistical point of like, there's a lot of them here. This is a big pile. This is a small pile. This is bigger than this. What changed? Okay, you need to now unpack the pile and go, okay, this one, I need to look at this one case, and they're all sealed and they're all secret. And even if they weren't, I don't particularly want to go, oh yeah, so this is Jane Smith's declaration, and let's go through it point by point, and let's make a judgment that the church was wrong. It's like, no. That's why we don't do it. It's not that there isn't this massive weight of anecdotal evidence that there's something there, but it's just like, dude, you can't do it. This is people's lives.
Mm-hmm. And the thing that I think is the most important here, I want to press on this, is if your friend, if they're strung out on drugs, you're going to do something very hardcore about it. becomes some kind of raging alcoholic, you're going to do something about it. If he starts probably cheating, beating on his wife, something like that, you're going to do something about it. But we don't seem to be in this same kind of rush to come to our friend who is in this invalid marriage, who is leading themselves to hell, or it's around these issues, really. It's the contraceptive issue and the invalid marriage issue, I think, are where we're least likely to really push on the people we love, when in all these other circumstances, we'd be like, no, you can't do that. Like, you need to fix this in your life. But that's one of the ones that we're really shying away from.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I actually wanted to go back and read from the old Baltimore Catechism. Layla quoted this in her article, but I think it lays everything out really clearly about invalid marriages.
That is what the Baltimore Catechism does really
it's
well.
Excellent.
It's such a good.
Just as a reminder, this law still holds today. It says the ordinary law of the church to be observed at the wedding of a Catholic is this: a Catholic can contract a true marriage only in the presence of an authorized priest and 2 witnesses. A Catholic who's married by a justice of the peace or a Protestant minister is really not married at all, but simply living in sin. If a Catholic is, quote, married in this way, it is a hypocrisy and a mockery of God. God puts no bond of marriage around such a couple as he does around couples who are married by a priest. Also, it says others may not be present. Other Catholics can't come to this, and they can't send gifts either, because then it's approving of it. What I find interesting is I've spoken to couples who were previously in a non-sacramental invalid marriage, so-called marriage, and then later on got married, sacramentally, and they said that they could tell the difference. They can tell the difference because in one case, you have the life of grace, and you have God's, life of grace. You're one. It's Christ and you and your spouse, and God's grace is there to help you through all the trials and difficulties. That's lacking in the sacramentally invalid marriages. And these people say, I could tell the difference. It was like night and day. It was completely different. I could feel God's grace in this one protecting our marriage. Every Catholic should desire that, and we should encourage Catholics to do that.
And that probably contributes to the rate of divorce that we see now in modern day society, because we have all these people running around claiming to be married. They have no sacramental grace. So how are you going to stick together? I mean, that's like a binding element there, is that grace you get from Christ in order to keep the marriage together. Yeah. But I wanted to touch on something Simon said in his hard line of this same issue. You referenced this, right? You brought.
I forget them once I've written them, so you'll have to remind me.
You say it, and then it's out one ear.
It's gone, done. Yeah, that's it.
But I actually did listen to it, and Simon.
One viewer.
The one viewer, the one like, all that stuff. I shared it as well. But you actually made the good point that when it comes to this issue of to attend or not to attend, you're actually not. I mean, the church doesn't have an obligation where you have to go to any wedding, valid or invalid. So it's like, do I have to go to this wedding even if it's a valid wedding? No, you don't have to go. Even if it's probably a good thing if you do go to your son's valid wedding. It's probably a good prudential judgment, but you don't have to go. So it shouldn't be this huge dilemma in that sense.
Yeah, and I think as well, we were kind of joking about this earlier, but there's sort of this idea as well that, oh, well, I won't go to the service itself. I won't go to the mass. I won't go to not the mass, but I won't go to whatever the wedding service is, on there. But I'll go to the party afterwards. And it's like, my brother in Christ, do you like cake that much? I mean, is that it? You can just go buy cake, right? You can just go buy cake. You can just go to a dance hall. You can just go drink. You can do the cha-cha slide whenever you like. It's okay. You can do it in your living room like Tom Cruise. It's not a problem. You don't. That itself is you're going to the celebration of the thing. I mean, when you read in the Gospels, and Christ is always using this image of the wedding there between, but he's always talking about the wedding feast. The actual wedding itself, it's like what details do we know about the wedding at Cana? We know the wine ran out at the party afterwards, and that's about it. We don't know what happened at the wedding, and presumably it was a fairly average Jewish wedding of the era. But yeah, we don't know about that. We know about the party afterwards. We know about the wedding feast of the Lamb. It's this whole idea of this. So Christ sees that as being an essential part of the thing. That's part of the celebration. That's the bit that you really participate in. The ministers of the sacrament within the Latin Church are the couple themselves. It's like you turning up and you're not one of the official witnesses, unless you are standing up at the wedding, unless you're the best man, maid of honor, or whatever. You aren't one of the official witnesses. You have no liturgical thing. You are liturgical parsley at this point. You are left on the side of the plate and no one cares.
Yeah, but they still have to have a priest.
They still have to have a priest, yes.
Which is one of the reasons why a lot of people don't understand this. With the Society of St. Pius X, the SSPX, that was the reason Pope Francis granted them faculties to be able to witness marriages if the bishop allows it. It's not automatic. The bishop has to delegate that. And it wasn't for the benefit of the SSPX, as many people wrongly claim, as if it was some way of him recognizing their canonical status. It was for the benefit of the faithful. Why? Because the SSPX was producing hundreds, if not thousands, of invalid marriages, which mean fornicating couples. These were coming out of the SSPX. It's a grave problem, so Pope Francis had to step in. He had to fix the problem, and it's just frustrating when people say, oh, well, look, he did this, therefore he recognizes her status. No, he didn't do it for that reason. He did it to stop this grave problem of invalid marriages.
Yeah, because there is no common error when it comes to matrimony, because there's this common error with regard to confession. So it's the idea that if you go into a confessional and there is somebody on the other side of the little screen and you say, bless me, Father, for I have sinned, and he says, okay, well, ego te absolvo. Okay, you are absolved because of common error, even if that person isn't a priest or doesn't have valid abilities to do so. You are actually absolved because of common error, because you would fall into that. There is no such common error for matrimony.
Yeah.
Now,
but I taught Nick something. I feel good.
He's like,
that's me. I'm dining out on that for a week.
See, I'm just going to walk into any box and confess now. But, so yeah, getting back to that point, yeah, you don't really have to attend any wedding. And even the church, and if you were to look this up, if you really like to turn to the Catechism, can I attend an invalid wedding? Actually, it's not there explicitly. Now, if you're a Catholic out there who says, wait, the church doesn't actually condemn it, I get to go. No, there are other moral principles that come into play here that are obviously applied to this question of can I attend or not to attend. I mean, you look at the Catechism, paragraph 1868, I'll read from it. It's talking about sin in general and our potential cooperation in the sin of another, which is what we're doing if we show up and witness one of these marriages. Catechism says, quote, we have a responsibility for the sins committed by others. So we can be held responsible for other people's sins in these circumstances. When we cooperate in them by ordering the sin, advising it, praising it, there we go, or approving it, and by not disclosing or hindering it when we have an obligation to do so. So if we didn't speak up beforehand, and if we're going to the thing, we have that binding moral obligation on our conscience now to say, hey, you participated in this sin. So that moral principle aptly applies to this situation.
Yeah.
And Layla said that what she wrote in her article would have been non-controversial in any previous era, but today it's controversial, and I think it's because the sexual revolution has had very far-reaching consequences. It has done so much damage in all aspects of marriage and the family, and it just seems, for instance, we have the problem of contraception. I think only right now, 13% of Catholics, I believe we have the statistic here, only 13% of Catholics believe that contraception is morally wrong. That means 87% of Catholics everywhere just think it's perfectly fine. Plenty of Catholics actually use it. In fact, I did a show on this, on Forward Boldly, on the pill, and the percentage of childbearing Catholic women who are using contraception is basically the same as secular non-Catholic women. So it's just a horrible thing. Contraception is one of the worst things you could possibly do in your marriage. It very often leads to divorce, and as I pointed out, it leads to silent abortions. People don't realize this. The industry doesn't want you to know this, but it acknowledges the fact that because it reduces the endometrium, the embryo, the baby cannot attach, therefore the baby essentially starves to death. That's a baby with a unique soul, DNA, a person who is dying, and it's happening in your womb without your knowing it if you've been on the pill. So.
Yeah, and these are, I think that when you look at the consequences of the sexual revolution, you're not just looking at the. See, it's interesting. You talk about this issue of divorce, invalid marriages and stuff as a consequence of the sexual revolution, and you say these are a consequence of contraception. Contraception, in many ways, is human ingenuity solving the problem humans have created. So humans created with the sexual revolution this notion of I can have sex whenever, wherever, however I like. Whatever I want to do is okay. But one of the kinds of sex that I want to have is sex without consequence. I just want to have sex. I don't want to have this unitive family-creating thing. So what do? Human ingenuity means you have to create contraception. Human ingenuity then means you have to create abortion. Human ingenuity means that you have to create all of the laws that will allow it and do this, because that's just what humans do. Humans never go, hold up, this thing that we wanted maybe wasn't a good idea. And so that's what you're seeing, that you're seeing this sense of, okay, humans have gone down that path of the sexual revolution of, sex is now whatever I want it to be. This is the whole thing with lesbianism and homosexuality and transgenderism and bisexualism, all of these kind of things, all of these different, things that the Catholic Church says is sexual perversions. Well, absolutely, they are perversions. They are a change of what sex should be. And human ingenuity says, okay, these come with problems. Don't worry, we'll smooth over those problems for you to a certain degree. And when things go horribly wrong, we'll just brush you aside. So this is why, society brushes aside the people who have regrets about abortion. The media doesn't want to listen to them. Society brushes aside the women who are suffering blood clots and cancer and so forth from the use of contraception. It brushes aside the adults who have been damaged by divorce. It brushes aside the children of divorce. It brushes aside all these people and just says, no. You're an embarrassment. You are the casualties on the way to our brave new world. Yeah. And how many people, what percentage of people have been damaged by the sexual revolution? I would want to say it's over 50%.
Absolutely. And also you asked before, how do we keep the lines of communication open with our children who may be in these invalid marriages? Maybe they might be in a so-called gay marriage. How do you deal with that? I think we have to make the distinction between you yourself dealing with it as a parent versus if you have other children, your primary duty is to protect your children. So for instance, I know of families, good Catholic devout families, who have siblings who may not be in good relationships, and the parents, devout Catholic parents, they're willing to meet one-on-one with those people because it's not a danger to their soul. But if they have young children, they're like, no, I'm not exposing my children to this. I'm not going to bring them over to their house to stay there and essentially expose them to this union, because what it does to the children's mind is it normalizes the union. So if it's a gay couple, bring them over to the house, it normalizes the relationship to the children. It exposes them to something that they otherwise wouldn't know about. Even if you go home and say, okay, now we don't believe in this, it's too late. You've exposed them to it. So I think it's different. You, yourself, I think, can go and meet with this person. But if you have children, it depends. But if you have children, you have to protect your children. Because
the gospel is divisive. I mean, that's what it is. If you don't hate mother, brother, sister, whatever, it's love of God first. There is no, love of God and love of neighbor on equal playing fields. They're not on an equal playing field. Love of God is completely first, because if you don't have the first great commandment, love of God, you can't possibly do number 2, which is love of neighbor. Mm-hmm. And that's what it is. And so it's going to be a divisive situation, but it's never one that, I'm not going to cut off the ties with someone because I'm strong enough to go in that situation one-on-one and be able to say, you know what, this is what right is, this is what wrong is, and it's whatever. But if that other person wants to do it, then that's just is what it is. Like, I can't purposely put myself or others in harm's way to go to care for this person who obviously doesn't have the goodwill. I mean, peace is for people of goodwill, not for everyone. The people of not goodwill will never feel peace. They'll never know the genuine love and peace of Christ if they remain in that ill will. And so that's what we have to be able to separate ourselves and know, but always praying, fasting for them. But sometimes that actual relationship where you can be on speaking terms, be on friendly terms, just can't exist.
Yeah, it's difficult. Interesting. So people out there don't know, but Dave Nussman, who's the producer, you'll see his name in the thing, puts together these great notes, which we always ignore. But occasionally, the other Dave Hager, holds up a card that says, get back to the notes, which he has done periodically. There's a note here that was put under my section, which I find absolutely hilarious. And I want to do something in the last few minutes, something a little more positive, because we've been kind of warning people about this. I've got a note saying, any advice for young Catholics looking for a spouse, which is absolutely hilarious, because how old am I? 45, 46?
Gen X.
Yeah, Gen X. I'm 45, 46, whatever. I have not been a young Catholic for a long time. My wife and I got married 17 years ago. We got married because I made her laugh and I write poetry. But I'm not sure that those are necessarily solid pieces of advice for everyone to practice. So really, this isn't just a question, though, of like looking for somebody who's willing to stick a ring on the third finger of their left hand. This is looking for somebody who's willing to be a Catholic spouse with you, who's willing to go into that. What advice can we offer to people out there on that one?
Well, I would say, and it kind of goes along with the whole thing we've been talking about here, if you were to participate in any way in one of these invalid marriages, you're actually breaking the 8th commandment, which is, thou shalt not bear false witness. You're giving adherence to something that's a lie. Conversely, when you're looking for a good spouse, you want to look for someone who's actually living the truth, right? I mean, the truth in terms of our conscience, that's one of our highest vocations. A man is a rational animal. We are meant to assent to the truth. Obviously, that's the truth of the Catholic faith, the truth of Christ, and all the truth that he brings. But it's the truth nonetheless, and that's what God has made us for. So when you find someone out there, have those conversations with them that elicit, do they believe in this truth? Do they not believe in this truth? Don't wait to have those type of conversations. Skip the small talk. Have it as an introductory thing, but then get to those things pretty quickly.
Discuss important stuff. Yeah.
In addition to that, I would say pray novenas. Ask Our Lady to guide you to find your spouse. Pray a novena to Our Lady of the Rosary. It's the most powerful novena in the world. If you have to pray multiple novenas, pray them, but ask Our Lady specifically, choose the spouse for me, and she will.
Yeah. Find something.
Be holy.
Yeah.
It's the easiest thing. You're going to attract people in your life, whether it be friends, spouses, whatever, people of similar values, people that the way you act, people are just going to come into your life that either one that you could help bring along that needs your help. Like you're a strong person, you'll generally attract people who may be a little weaker in the faith just because they see the strength in you, and so they want to learn from you, see what you have to offer. But in terms of genuine friendships and spouses and all that, you're going to attract people that are similar to you in your values and in your actions. And so you can theoretically live the faith all you want, but you're going to really bring those people around you who are doing the actual actions that you're doing. And so if you're actually striving to live out this holy life and being around people, not just being in your own little pious room, going to your room and praying and all that, but if you're actually out there in the world evangelizing, making a difference, then things for the most part tend to fall into place.
Yeah.
And humility is key here. I wanted to say this because I see this amongst young Catholic, good faithful Catholic men out there. Humility is key here. Don't think that God owes you a spouse.
Not true.
That there is this mentality out there that's like, I've been living virtuously for a year now, and I've not done this, I've not looked at porn or whatever.
Is this the Catholic version of I'm a nice guy? This is the Catholic version
this might be that.
Yeah.
But there's this thinking there that you're doing all the right things, so God needs to give you a spouse now, a traditional Catholic wife, ASAP. No, that may not come for 5 years. That might not come at all. And you have to realize that may or may not be the will of God.
And also, there are people who are desperate to find a spouse, and they get frustrated with God and think, why, just kind of following on what you said. And very often it's because they still have a lot of things to work on themselves. Scripture says, seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things shall be added unto you. It could be that you're not really placing God necessarily first, or especially if you're desperate to find a spouse. I think there's something wrong there. If you're desperate to find a spouse, you should be completely resigned to the will of God, whatever his will is, and make him first in all things, and then all these other things shall be added unto you.
Yeah, it's see, that's a very interesting thing, because I've seen kind of two sort of attitudes in young men, because it's invariably young men that I talk to, about this kind of thing. And I've seen these two things and they're very much the same kind of mindset. And the first is the man who says that he wants a religious vocation. And I'm like, okay, that's great. Which community, which order? Are you? I think it's like, well, I'd like one with, with a Marian devotion. No, stop. Saying I want a religious vocation and answering which community with, well, they should have Marian devotion and they should, be cloistered and they whatever. That's like saying, yes, I want to get married. Okay, to who? Well, she's got to be a green-eyed Latina. And it's like, whoa, stop. That's not how you would choose a spouse. That shouldn't be how you choose a vocation. That should be a falling in love, with that sense. But equally as well, sometimes I've seen particularly young men who are just so desperate to get married. It's like, okay, who is this girl? Is this does she actually exist, or is she some hypothetical creature that you're imagining and you're searching around for that? And there is that tendency of, I desperately want to get married, I want to be married, I want to be a Catholic father, I want to be a Catholic husband, I want to be this. And maybe it exists within the women as well. But it's like you're not understanding you don't just get married, you get married to a person. The two of you make marriage together, and marriage is directed to a person, not just the general idea itself.
And that's the thing, is that your desires, while desires are good, your desires are ultimately for God. And so this idealized thing, whether it be job, religious vocation, spouse, whatever, all those things, these idealized things are really just desires that you ultimately have for God. And it's more of, God, what do you want me to do? What have you placed in my life? Because you're never going to find this perfect thing, which is why I think I was listening to one Father Ripperger talking about, I think, marriage or dating or something. And he was basically just like, people, just find virtuous Catholic people and get married to them, and you're not going to regret it. Because if you're truly a good Catholic, it's not about, well, I want this, I want that. If they're truly a person living out the faith, living out what marriage is supposed to be, it's going to end up working pretty well.
Yeah, and also if it's this, I want this and I want that, you're already starting off on the wrong foot, because marriage is sacrifice. It's sacrifice. It's also, it's very difficult, as anybody has been in a marriage knows. It's difficult. It's placing the other person before yourself. And if you don't go into marriage understanding that, you are not ready to get married, because it's not about, I want this and I want that, and she has to do this and he has to do that. It's, what can I do for her? I have to lay down my life for her. You can look at the example of the Holy Family. I have a great devotion to the Holy Family. I love thinking about the Holy Family. If you read Mystical City of God by Maria of Agreda, you can learn about the early life of Joseph and Mary. And they were absolutely beautiful, and they perfectly modeled the perfect marriage in the sense that they competed with each other to show greater service to the other. They competed in their humility toward one another. So St. Joseph would be like, how can I serve? I would like to serve you. And Our Lady would be like, no, let me serve you. And they would go back and forth like that. I mean, it was the perfect model for marriage. And that's what people need to understand going into it. Marriage is about sacrifice. It's not about, I want this and you're going to give this to me.
Yeah. Be thankful for the things that you don't like about your spouse. Those are opportunities for sacrifice. My wife will tell you there's a lot of stuff she doesn't like about me. So.
How could this be?
You'll say, and I got to say, I love you, honey. It's actually our 10-year anniversary today.
Oh, wow!
Yes,
Congratulations!
So, I hope everyone out there prayers for continued happy and holy marriage. But find those opportunities, because they're going to be. I mean, with the kids and dealing with the spouse and all the different little sacrifices that God puts in your way and in your day.
Well, I think there's a very important thing. I think this would be the advice. This is once you've got the spouse and once you're kind of 5, 10, 15 years in. Once you're in, the piece of advice that I would give, because we're 17 years this year, I think, my wife and I. 06, what's that, 17? Yeah.
Your wife would know.
She would, yeah. I know the year, I just don't do the math. I know I was born in 77 and I couldn't tell you how old I was. It's like 45, 46, something like that. But once you get into that point, you get to the stage where you start saying, and genuinely, it's like, okay, I love you, and honey, I love you every single day and all the times, because that is an act of the will's decision. There are times when I don't like you, and there are times when she won't like you. And that, I think, to your point of like, have these substantive discussions first, because there comes a point when it's like, okay, the gloss has kind of worn off, that first infatuation and the romance and all this sort of stuff has worn off. And fine, maybe it only wears off for a day or two or an hour or a moment or something like that, but wear off it does. And if you don't have, as you said, Christine, that sacramental thing, if you haven't got the holiness, if you haven't got that to kind of carry you through, that's the moment you just start going like, let's go, we're done, and that's a dangerous. That's a dangerous and very bad place to be.
That's what the secular culture does.
That's what the secular culture does, and that's what not having Christ in your marriage does. Anyway, thank you for joining us for today's episode of The Download. Now, please join us as we finish in prayer, begging Our Lady's intercession for our nation and our church. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Salve Regina, Mater Misericordiae, Vita dulcedo et spes nostra salve. Ad te clamamus exules filii Eve. Ad te suspiramus gementes et in hac lacrimarum vale, ea ergo advocata nostra, ilos tuos misericordes oculos ad nos converte, et Iesum benedictum fructum ventris tui, nobis post hoc exilium ostende, O clemens, Sophia, O dulcis Virgo Maria. Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Thank you again for joining us for The Download. We premiere a new episode like this every weekday at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. From all of us here at Church Militant, may God bless you.